Robert Louis Stevenson, Child's Play, narrated by Gary Williams. The regret we have for our childhood is not wholly justifiable, so much a man may lay down without fear of public ribaldry. For although we shake our heads over the change, we are not unconscious of the manifold advantages of our new state. What we lose in generous impulse, we more than gain in the habit of generously watching others, and the capacity to enjoy Shakespeare may balance a lost aptitude for playing at soldiers. Terror is gone out of our lives. Moreover, we no longer see the devil in the bed curtains, nor lie awake to listen to the wind. We go to school no more, and if we have only exchanged one drudgery for another, which is by no means sure, we are set free forever from the daily fear of chastisement. And yet a great change has overtaken us, and although we do not enjoy ourselves less, at least we take our pleasure differently. We need pickles nowadays to make Wednesday's cold mutton please our Friday's appetite. And I can remember the time when to call it red venison and tell myself a hunter's story would have made it more palatable than the best of sauces. To the grown person, cold mutton is cold mutton all the world over. Not all the mythology ever invented by man will make it better or worse to him. The broad fact, the claimant reality of the mutton carries away before it such seductive figments. But for the child, it is still possible to weave an enchantment over eatables. And if he has but read of a dish in a storybook, it will be heavenly manna to him for a week. If a grown man does not like eating and drinking and exercise, if he is not something positive in his tastes, it means he has a feeble body and should have some medicine. But children may be pure spirits if they will and take their enjoyment in the world of moonshine. Sensation does not count for so much in our first years as afterwards. Something of the swaddling numbness of infancy clings about us. We see and touch and hear through a sort of golden mist. Children, for instance, are able enough to see, but they have no great faculty for looking. They do not use their eyes for the pleasure of using them, but for by ends of their own, and the things I call the mind seeing most vividly were not beautiful in themselves, but merely interesting or enviable to me, as I thought they might be turned to practical account in play. Nor is the sense of touch so clean and poignant in children as it is in a man. If you will turn over your old memories, I think the sensations of this sort you remember will be somewhat vague and come to not much more than a blunt general sense of heat on summer days, or a blunt general sense of well-being in bed. And here, of course, you will understand pleasurable sensations, for overmastering pain, the most deadly and tragical element in life, and the true commander of man's soul and body, alas, pain has its own way with all of us. It breaks in a rude visitant upon the fairy garden where the child wanders in a dream, no less surely than its rules upon the field of battle, or sends the immortal war god whimpering to his father, and innocence, no more than philosophy, can protect us from this sting. As for taste, when we bear in mind the excesses of unmitigated sugar which delight a youthful palate, it is surely no very cynical asperity, to think, taste, a character of the maturer growth. Smell and hearing are perhaps more developed. I remember many scents, many voices, and a great deal of spring singing in the woods. But hearing is capable of vast improvement as a means of pleasure, and there is all the world between gaping wonderment at the jargon of birds and the emotion with which a man listens to articulate music. At the same time, and step by step, with the increase in the definition and intensity of what we feel which accompanies our growing age, another change takes place in the sphere of intellect, by which all things are transformed and seen through theories and associations as through coloured windows. We make to ourselves, day by day, out of history, a gossip and economical speculations, and God knows what, a medium in which we walk, and through which we look abroad. We study shop windows with other eyes than in our childhood, never to wonder, not always to admire, but to make and modify our little incongruous theories about life. It is no longer the uniform of a soldier that arrests our attention, but perhaps the flowing carriage of a woman, or perhaps a countenance that has been vividly stamped with passion and carries an adventurous story written in its lines. The pleasure of surprise is passed away. Sugar loaves and water carts seem mighty tame to encounter, and we walk the streets to make romances and to sociologize. Nor must we deny that a good many of us walk them solely for the purpose of transit or in the interest of a livelier digestion. These, indeed, may look back with mingled thoughts upon their childhood, but the rest are in a better case. They know more than when they were children. They understand better. Their desires and sympathies answer more nimbly to the provocation of the senses, and their minds are brimming with interest as they go about the world. According to my contention, this is a flight to which children cannot rise. They are wheeled in perambulators or dragged about by nurses in a pleasing stupor. A vague, faint, abiding wonderment possesses them. Here and there some specially remarkable circumstance, such as water cart or a guardsman, fairly penetrates into the seat of thought and calls them, for half a moment, out of themselves. And you may see them still towed forward sideways by the inexorable nurse, as by a sort of destiny, but still staring at the bright object in their wake. It may be some minutes before another such moving spectacle reawakens them to the world in which they dwell. For other children, they almost invariably show some intelligent sympathy. There is a fine fellow making mud pies, they seem to say, that I can understand there is some sense in mud pies. But the doings of their elders, unless where they are speakingly picturesque or recommended themselves by the quality of being easily imitable, they let them go over their heads, as we say, without the least regard. If it were not for this perpetual imitation, we should be tempted to fancy they despised us outright, or only consider us in the light of creatures brutally strong and brutally silly, among whom they condescended to dwell in obedience, like a philosopher at a barbarous court. At times, indeed, they display an arrogance of disregard that is truly staggering. Once, when I was groaning aloud with physical pain, a young gentleman came into the room and nonchalantly inquired if I had seen his bow and arrow. He made no account of my groans, which he accepted, as he had to accept so much else, as a piece of the inexplicable conduct of his elders. And like a wise young gentleman, he would waste no wonder on the subject. Those elders who care so little for rational enjoyment and are even the enemies of rational enjoyment for others, he had accepted without understanding and without complaint, as the rest of us accept the scheme of the universe. We grown people can tell ourselves a story, give and take strokes until the bucklers ring, ride far and fast, marry, fall and die, all the while sitting quietly by the fire or laying prone in bed. This is exactly what a child cannot do, or does not do, at least when he can find anything else. He works all with lay figures and stage properties. When his story comes to the fighting, he must rise, get something by way of a sword, and have a set to with a piece of furniture, until he is out of breath. When he comes to ride with the king's pardon, he must bestride a chair, which he will so hurry and belabour, and on which he will so furiously demean himself, that the messenger will arrive, if not bloody with spurring, at least fiery red with haste. If his romance involves an accident upon a cliff, he must clamber in person about the chest of drawers and fall bodily upon the carpet before his imagination is satisfied. Lead soldiers, dolls, or toys, in short, are the same category and answer the same end. Nothing can stagger a child's faith. He accepts the clumsiest substitutes and can swallow the most staring incongruities. The chair he has just been besieging as a castle, or valiantly cutting to the ground as a dragon, is taken away for the accommodation of a morning visitor, and he is nothing abashed. He can skirmish by the hour with a stationary coal scuttle. In the midst of the enchanted pleasance, he can see without sensible shock the gardener soberly digging potatoes for the day's dinner. He can make abstraction of whatever does not fit into his fable, and he puts his eyes into his pocket just as we hold our noses in an unsavoury lane. And so it is that although the ways of children cross with those of their elders in 100 places daily, they never go in the same direction, nor so much as lie in the same elements. So may the telegraph wires intersect the line of the high road, or so might a landscape painter and a bagman visit the same country and yet move in different worlds. People struck with these spectacles cry aloud about the power of imagination in the young. Indeed, there may be two words to that. It is, in some ways, but a pedestrian fancy that the child exhibits. It is the grown people who make the nursery stories. All the children do is jealously to preserve the text. One out of a dozen reasons why Robinson Crusoe should be so popular with youth is that it hits their level in this matter to a nicety. Crusoe was always at makeshifts and had, in so many words, to play at a great variety of professions. And then the book is all about tools, and there is nothing that delights a child so much. Hammers and saws belong to a province of life that positively calls for imitation. The juvenile lyrical drama, surely of the most ancient Thespian model, wherein the trades of mankind are successfully simulated to the running burthen on a cold and frosty morning, gives a good instance of the artistic taste in children. And this need for overt action and lay figures testifies to a defect in the child's imagination, which prevents him from carrying out his novels in the privacy of his own heart. He does not yet know enough of the world and men. His experience is incomplete. That stage wardrobe and scene room that we call the memory is so ill provided that he can overtake few combinations and body out few stories to his own content, without some external aid. He is at the experimental stage. He is not sure how one would feel in certain circumstances. To make sure, he must come as near trying it as his means permit. And so, here is young heroism with a wooden sword, and mothers practice their kind vocation over a bit of jointed stick. It may be laughable enough just now, but it is these same people and these same thoughts that not long hence, when they are on the theatre of life, will make you weep and tremble. For children think very much the same thoughts and dream the same dreams as bearded men and marriageable women. No one is more romantic. Fame and honor, the love of young men and the love of mothers, the businessman's pleasure in method, all these and others they anticipate and rehearse in their play hours. Upon us, who are further advanced and fairly dealing with the threads of destiny, they only glance from time to time to glean a hint for their own mimetic reproduction. Two children playing at soldiers are far more interesting to each other than one of the scarlet beings whom both are busy imitating. This is perhaps the greatest oddity of all. Art for art is their motto, and the doings of grown folk are only interesting as the raw material for play. Not Theophile Gautier, not Flaubert can look more callously upon life, or rate the reproduction more highly over the reality, and they will parody an execution, a deathbed, or the funeral of the young man of Nain with all the cheerfulness in the world. The true parallel for play is not to be found, of course, in the conscious art, which, though it be derived from play, is itself an abstract impersonal thing, and depends largely upon philosophical interests beyond the scope of childhood. It is when we make castles in the air and personate the leading character in our own romances that we return to the spirit of our first years. Only there are several reasons why the spirit is no longer so agreeable to indulge. Nowadays, when we admit this personal element into our divagations, we are apt to stir up uncomfortable and sorrowful memories, and remind ourselves sharply of old wounds. Our daydreams can no longer lie all in the air like a story in the Arabian Nights. They read to us rather like the history of a period in which we ourselves had taken part, where we come across many unfortunate passengers and find our own conduct smartly reprimanded. And then the child, mind you, acts his parts. He does not merely repeat them to himself. He leaps, he runs and sets the blood agog over all his body. And so his play breathes him, and he no sooner assumes a passion than he gives it vent. Alas, when we betake ourselves to our intellectual form of play, sitting quietly by the fire or laying prone in bed, we rouse many hot feelings for which we can find no outlet. Substitutes are not acceptable to the mature mind, which desires the thing itself. And even to rehearse a triumphant dialogue with one's enemy, although it is perhaps the most satisfactory piece of play still left within our reach, is not entirely satisfying and is even apt to lead to a visit and an interview which may be the reverse of triumphant after all. In the child's world of dim sensation, play is all in all. Making believe is the gist of his whole life, and he cannot so much as take a walk except in character. I could not learn my alphabet without some suitable mise en scène, and had to act a businessman in an office before I could sit down to my book. Will you kindly question your memory and find out how much you did, work or pleasure, in good faith and soberness, and for how much you had to cheat yourself with some invention? I remember, as though it were yesterday, the expansion of spirit, the dignity and self-reliance that came with a pair of mustachios in burnt cork, even when there was none to see. Children are even content to forego what we call the realities and prefer the shadow to the substance. When they might be speaking intelligibly together, they chatter senseless gibberish by the hour, and are quite happy because they are making believe to speak French. I have said already how even the imperious appetite of hunger suffers itself to be gulled and led by the nose with the fag end of an old song. And it goes deeper than this. When children are together, even a meal is felt as an interruption in the business of life, and they must find some imaginative sanction and tell themselves some sort of story to account for, to colour, to render entertaining the simple process of eating and drinking. What wonderful fancies I have heard evolved out of the pattern upon teacups, from which there followed a code of rules and a whole world of excitement until tea-drinking began to take rank as a game. When my cousin and I took our porridge of a morning, we had a device to enliven the course of the meal. He ate his with sugar, and explained it to be a country continually buried under snow. I took mine with milk, and explained it to be a country suffering gradual inundation. You can imagine us exchanging bulletins, how here was an island still unsubmerged, here a valley not yet covered with snow. What inventions were made! How his population lived in cabins on perches and travelled on stilts, and how mine was always in boats. How the interest grew furious as the last corner of the safe ground was cut off on all sides and grew smaller every moment, and how, in fine, the food was of altogether secondary importance, and might even have been nauseous, so long as we seasoned it with these dreams. But perhaps the most exciting moments I ever had over a meal were in the case of calves' feet jelly. It was hardly possible not to believe, and you may be sure, so far from trying, I did all I could to favour the illusion that some part of it was hollow, and that sooner or later my spoon would lay open the secret tabernacle of the golden rock. There might some miniature Redbeard await his hour. There might one find the treasures of the 40 thieves, and bewildered chasm beating about the walls. And so I quarried on slowly, with bated breath, savouring the interest. Believe me, I had little palate left for the jelly, and though I preferred the taste when I took cream with it, I used often to go without, because the cream dimmed the transparent fractures. Even with games, this spirit is authoritative with right-minded children. It is thus that hide-and-seek has so preeminent a sovereignty, for it is the wellspring of romance, and the actions and the excitement to which it gives rise lend themselves to almost any sort of fable. And thus cricket, which is a mere matter of dexterity, palpably about nothing and for no end, often fails to satisfy infantile craving. It is a game, if you like, but not a game of play. You cannot tell yourself a story about cricket, and the activity it calls forth can be justified on no rational theory. Even football, though it admirably simulates the tug and the ebb and flow of battle, has presented difficulties to the mind of young sticklers after verisimilitude. And I knew at least one little boy who was mightily exercised about the presence of the ball, and had to spirit himself up whenever he came to play with an elaborate story of enchantment, and take the missile as a sort of talisman banded about in conflict between two Arabian nations. To think of such a frame of mind is to become disquieted about the bringing up of children. Surely they dwell in a mythological epoch, and are not the contemporaries of their parents. What can they think of them? What can they make of these bearded or petticoated giants who look down upon their games, who move upon a cloudy Olympus, following unknown designs apart from rational enjoyment, who profess the tenderest solicitude for children, and yet every now and again reach down out of their altitude and terribly vindicate the prerogatives of age? Off goes the child, corporally smarting, but morally rebellious. Were there ever such unthinkable deities as parents? I would give a great deal to know what, in 9 cases out of 10, is the child's unvarnished feeling. A sense of past cajolery, a sense of personal attraction, at best very feeble above all. I should imagine a sense of terror for the untried residue of mankind go to make up the attraction that he feels. No wonder, poor little heart, with such a weltering world in front of him, if he clings to the hand he knows. The dread irrationalities of the whole affair, as it seems to children, is a thing we are all too ready to forget. Oh, why, I remember passionately wondering, why can we not all be happy and devote ourselves to play? And when children do philosophize, I believe, it is usually to very much the same purpose. One thing, at least, comes very clearly out of these considerations, that whatever we are to expect at the hands of children, it should not be any peddling exactitude about matters of fact. They walk in a vain show, and among mists and rainbows. They are passionate after dreams and unconcerned about realities. Speech is a difficult art, not wholly learned, and there is nothing in their own tastes or purposes to teach them by what we mean by abstract truthfulness. When a bad writer is inexact, even if he can look back on half a century of years, we charge him with incompetence and not with dishonesty. And why not extend the same allowance to imperfect speakers? Let a stockbroker be dead stupid about poetry, or a poet inexact in the details of business, and we excuse them heartily from blame. But show us a miserable, unbreeched human entity whose whole profession is to take a tub for a fortified town and a shaving brush for the deadly stiletto, and who passes 3/4 of his time in a dream and the rest in open self-deception, and we expect him to be as nice upon a matter of the fact as a scientific expert bearing evidence. Upon my heart, I think it less than decent. You do not consider how little the child sees, or how swift he is to weave what he has seen into bewildering fiction, and that he cares no more for what you call truth than you for a gingerbread dragoon. I am reminded as I write that the child is very inquiring as to the precise truth of stories. But indeed, this is a very different matter, and one bound up with the subject of play and the precise amount of playfulness or playability to be looked for in the world. Many such burning questions must arise in the course of nursery education. Among the fauna of the planet, which already embraces the pretty soldier and the terrifying Irish beggarman, is or is not the child to expect a bluebeard or a cormorant? Is he or is he not to look out for magicians, kindly and potent? May he or may he not reasonably hope to be cast away upon a desert island, or turn to such diminutive proportions that he can live on equal terms with his lead soldiers and go a cruise in his own toy schooner? Surely all these are practical questions to a neophyte entering upon life with a view to play. Precision upon such a point the child can understand, but if you merely ask him of his past behavior, as to who threw such a stone, for instance, or struck such and such a match, or whether he had looked into a parcel or gone by a forbidden path, why, he can see no moment in the inquiry. And it is 10 to 1. He has already half forgotten and half bemused himself with subsequent imaginings. It would be easy to leave them in their native cloudland, where they figure so prettily, pretty like flowers and innocent like dogs. They will come out of their garden soon enough, and have to go into offices and the witness box. Spare them yet a while, O conscientious parent, Let them doze among the playthings yet a little, for who knows what a rough, warfaring existence lies before them in the future.